It was the blockbuster record that put rock and roll back on the front burner in the middle of disco, and it came out of nowhere. Sent shockwaves through the industry when it sold out virtually everywhere. Yet, this album had been rejected by every major label in the industry. One even wrote a rude letter saying it offered nothing new at all. The genius behind it had been tinkering in his basement for nearly 6 years perfecting the sound of this record. He was rejected, he was laughed at, humiliated, on the verge of financial ruin. Coming up next, an original band member who was there during that stint, during the basement years, tells rock and roll's ultimate Cinderella story, the record that saved rock and roll. Coming up next. Hey music junkies, Professor of Rock, always here to celebrate the greatest artists and the greatest songs of all time. You know, if it's only rock and roll but you like it, you're going to want to subscribe below right now so you never miss an episode of our daily features. Make sure to click the bell so you get our interviews. Also check us out on Patreon to become an insider with us. So it's time for another edition of our show Breakthrough, where we break down that singular sensation that helped kick open the door to an artist's career and give him long-term success and viability. It was one of the greatest debut albums of all time by a monster rock band that by my account is really the most underappreciated bands of the rock and roll era. They should be in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. Should have been long ago. I know we talk about the big rock Hall of Fame snubs quite a bit on here. For my money, this might be the mother of all snubs because they really helped save rock and roll when it was floundering, in the mid-70s, buried beneath an industry that had been built at that time on disco and mellow pop and singer-songwriter fare. Not saying anything bad about these genres, just saying that rock was on the back burner. Well, this band and their 17 million selling debut album blew up radio literally. You know who I'm talking about, Boston, and their expansive debut album with rock standards like More Than a Feeling, A Peace of Mind, Long Time, Hitch a Ride, Smokin', just to name but a few. Released in August of 1976, Boston self-titled, nothing short of a rock and roll miracle. The band came out of nowhere and they shook the world off its axis, injecting a primal energy into radio. Tom Scholz, the author of the Boston Sound, he'd been tinkering in his basement for nearly 6 years, tweaking the record, overdubbing and perfecting the sound that he heard in his head. Many people thought he was going insane, that he'd been indoors too long. But Tom Scholz had a vision. He had an eye single to the sound that he was trying to communicate to the world. His dream actually seemed to be slipping away. He was ridiculed, he was humiliated, he was dirt poor. Tom Scholz would later say, everybody thought that it was impossible, because disco ruled the airwaves at the time. But we stumbled onto a sound that worked. Many would try to imitate it, but they would never equal it. This record of powerful riffs, multi-layered vocal extravaganzas, harmonized guitar leads, it would overcome the popularity of disco, a fad that had romanced the nation. But that Boston sound, it swept America off of its feet. And the thing is, it got rejected by all these labels, Capitol, RCA Atlantic, Elektra, even the label they ended up on, Epic. They initially told him to take a hike. According to the band, they sent a very insulting letter, was signed by company head, Lenny Petsy, that said that the band offered nothing new. Went on to sell 17 million copies. And for decades, it was the biggest selling debut album ever. What a story. Now, to further investigate this Cinderella rock story, we have original Boston drummer Jim Mazdia. He was with Tom Scholz in the basement for those 5 years as Boston's self-titled debut album really came together. Actually, Jim Mazdia was given an arrangement credit on the album, so very cool here. We'll get his insight. He's going to tell us about those years of tireless effort and the genius of Tom Scholz and the genius of vocal god Brad Delp, who never gets enough credit, one of the greatest ever. as well as the creation of the classic rock masterpieces Foreplay and Long Time. Now, as we go into this interview, I do want to thank our sponsor, Zenni Eyewear, the brand I always wear. So here's the thing. If you wear glasses, you've got to try Zenni. First of all, their variety is phenomenal. You design your own frames. You see how you look before you buy with their mirror feature. And the price point, it's pretty incredible. Up to 80% off regular retail prices. And on our channel, if you click on the info button up here, you'll get an even better deal. Click up here or in the description today. Here's the interview. I'm proud to recognize the historic contributions of Mr. James Mazdia. Jim, thank you so much for being a part of this Revelations with Professor of Rock. We really appreciate it. We're really excited. You're part of one of the most interesting basement to penthouse stories in all of music history. But let's go back to your humble beginnings. You grew up in a neighborhood in Jamaica Plain, which was part of Boston's inner city.
Correct. It was actually right along the New Haven rail line. And it was in the red-lined area. It was a big controversy back then. My parents had bought an old Victorian, and even in the 70s, we could only get $10,000 for it because it had been redlined. You couldn't get mortgages. The house was a beautiful old Victorian. That's where I came from. I mean, it was a cool neighborhood to grow up. It was definitely the inner city.
Well, around 1970, when you responded to an advertisement from a band that included Tom Scholz and really connected with Tom and developed a really close relationship with him, what was it that made you two click?
After I had auditioned for the band, it was actually 69. It was the summer of 69. A week went by and I got a call back. It was from Tom, and they asked me to join. So on the first rehearsal, when I got back, brought my drums over, we were practicing on Mem Drive at MIT, one of the frat houses. So I brought my stuff up, set up, and we were about to start the first rehearsal. And Tom said, Jim, we auditioned a lot of drummers. We had guys from Berkeley, and many guys were trained, practiced, rudimental drummers. They'd studied for years. He goes, basically, they were all better than you. And I'm like, well, thanks a lot. But he goes, when we just jammed, they couldn't touch you. And that reason is because I taught myself to play. The guy from Berkeley played a drum solo from some prominent album at that time.
Buddy Rich at the drums, ladies and gentlemen.
Perfect, hit for hit, perfect. But when it came to playing, I've always just created in real time. I'm not trying to play something I played yesterday. I just play and this flows. So when we jammed, I'm always listening to the other players and interacting and reinforcing what they're doing, like say Brad's vocal phrasing. Tom's solos. I work with it to improve, to bring you more out of it. So that was my difference from all the other drummers. Tom wanted to write original tunes. So Tom, after we did that initial band and they brought me in, we did it for a few months, then it broke up. Tom and I agreed he was going to bring his gear to my home and we would continue working on the originals. That was the November 69. And I remember when Tom first moved the stuff over, he built a little security system. A little, like kind of a little something. He built a little light setting for us, but then he built this little security to protect the equipment because it was over in my neighborhood, Jamaica Plains ghetto, So, I mean, Tom, he bought a Silvertone amp back then. It was a Silvertone had a guitar amp. So he had a Silvertone amp, then he had an M1 organ that he had cut in half and rewired so we could make it easier to move, right? It was cool. So he brought his organ, his Leslie, the Silvertone, and he had a red Yamaha electric acoustic. We used to kid him about that, going, hey man, you got to jump start that or is it got the electric start? So he brought all that stuff to my house. For 5 years, almost once to twice a week, we developed all the first two albums. During that time, it was probably maybe 4, 5, 6 months. It was just Tom and I working on ideas. The first Boston song I ever recorded was Foreplay. In my basement, Tom and I, and Tom brought a little Sony over and recorded it. That was the first thing ever recorded. We basically developed a bunch of tunes, and then we went into a place called Natural Sound. It's in Maynard, Mass. It's a studio, and we did our first demo. So that was sometime in 70. I don't know if it was early, late 70. Then once we did the first session, we did that demo, then we decided we was trying to do a cover band, not a cover, but do a band, and Barry came back. We had a different singer and different bass player. So that was the beginning of the band.
Then in 74, Tom used more of his personal income that he'd made from Polaroid to finance another round of demo recordings.
Shoot a pack of instant pictures today.
And he started building the studio in his basement.
Well, we didn't start right away. After 70, when we did the first demo, we did, for about a year, we did a couple other tries in real studios. I remember we're in Jamaica Plains, it's a nice studio. We go in, start the session. Tom pulls out a wild flutter meter. And the engineer was like, "What the f*** is that?" I had no clue. They never made the machines run right. The wild flutter was so bad. Tom ran that thing like a Mercedes. He got this up. But the guy was like, "Whoa." So Tom was checking his machine, saying, "Oh, man, this machine's..." So he realized at that point that he's wasting money, and he knows more than these guys anyway. So he decided to make his own 4-track. He had a old Roberts reversing stereo reel-to-reel. It had moving heads. It had 4 heads where it would shift. He took that and he took a little Sony and he opened that up and he wired in a little patch field, and he could get into each of the channels of that 4-track. And that was how we started doing all the demos. So Tom and I, right from the beginning, it was an intimate relationship. He relied on my percussive foundation. He's a phenomenal keyboard player. I laid a nice feel, and he searched. We worked together. We interacted. We encouraged each other. If I like that, I'd let him know. If he thought I should do this different. And that's how all the songs were developed, us back and forth, because Tom played everything.
Well, what songs were on that first demo tape that you made with Tom? Do you remember?
Yeah, the main song that's significant is Hitch a Ride. It was San Francisco Day at the time. And of all the songs on the album, that was the only one that had really developed more maturity, because we're new at it, but it stood out. And there was Queen of Hearts. There was a few different songs. Basically, it's the songs. It's in different levels of development. But that one song, when we sent out the demo, every record label wanted to buy that tune. They didn't want to sign us because the rest of the stuff was not ready. But they all wanted to buy that tune. But Tom kept going. And that song, even till this day, when you listen to that song on the album, that song takes you back to my basement. It takes you back to the true roots of Boston. That's how we sounded. Before all the technology and everything that came along. So when you hear that, we're not the greatest players, but the energy and the feel and everything about it is amazing. And then that ending is classic. Halfway through the song, we start this long ending. It's really cool. Like, it ends and then it starts. And Tom had developed a device to give him multiple EQ curves. So it was the first time that anyone had really done such a thing with his solo, so that 5 different parts of that solo had different EQ curves. So they had different sound and impact. One of my favorite songs.
You mentioned Foreplay. Let's talk about Foreplay. While attending MIT, Tom created Foreplay, of course, an instrumental, and it was the first piece of music that Scholz composed.
It's probably one of the first ones, yeah. The first rehearsal in MIT, Tom already had that little lick, and then we started working on it. Beginning in 69, it was hard work. We spent 5 years in my basement. And then we developed a system after we had rehearsed and worked the song for who knows how long, and we were happy. I would move my kit to his house in Watertown, and we'd set up, mic it up, get the sound, and then we would spend all day on one song that we were going to work on. And I would do 1,000 takes. Tom recorded everything. The next week, he would review it all, go all through it. I'd come back the following week again, and then he'd play the stuff he liked best. Then I'd listen to that, and then I adapted and created the final drum bit. And then he then put everything on. You know, it's then bass, guitar, it's all Tom. That system, we did that for years. And that's how we kept developing. So at each stage, and we just keep going more and more.
Well, with Foreplay, was it originally presented to you as something that you wanted to have it arranged as like this dramatic rock symphony that we hear? Because it's very prog rock as well.
No, but it was just what he did.
What I love about Boston is Foreplay, when it first starts, and then all of a sudden, you start going into long time. Prog rock, and then going into the kind of the classic rock elements that make all classic rock great.
What you're describing, this is some of Tom's genius. Tom is an engineer. He's a designer. So all those subtle little things, it's Tom. It's no one else but Tom. Because that's his expertise. People always try to figure out how people write songs. Some people make believe that I sit down and I compose this piece. No. It's noodling. Any good musician, you sit in the living room, you watch the TV, and you're just noodling. You're just making your fingers go. You're just doing that. And over time, you end up, you end up with a piece, a part of a song. And then you figure something to go along with it. It's over time. It's interesting. You talked about Tom's equipment. I think all of the Rockman gear was inspired by, after Tom bought that Silvertone, first year, I remember he cut a hole in the side of the amp head, installed a 4 or 5 inch speaker, and then he got a big rheostat, and he could sit in the living room, and he could crank it up to get sustain, and he just dropped the speaker, and he could noodle. And that, I think, is the beginning of the Rockman, because the next step was the power soak. So that rheostat, he got to do that. He then turned around and packaged it into a box, and he made it the power soak. Then the next step was a network, a resistor network. And I actually, with him in his shop, we built the breadboard for that. I put together, he designed the circuit and grabbed it, and I built the thing on the breadboard. And then that came out as the box that was it was positioned so you could get different levels. Then the Rockman finally, years later, was developed. But that, I think, was the inspiration. The inspiration was noodling, sitting with your wife in the living room watching TV. And then I don't know if he really knew he was going to get the sound, but by doing that, he allowed himself to crank the amp, saturate the tubes, but have the volume low and have incredible sustain. So I don't know if he was planning that or it just happened from noodling,
Foreplay is this breathtaking orchestral track that segues into long time. And then it goes into that classic rock sound that we know as classic rock now. They weren't calling it that then. But the second single from the album, what do you remember about arranging the two songs together to segue with him? There's the organ and the acoustic guitar, the hand claps.
A lot of what happened in these songs is that when we were playing live, we started doing segues. So as we're trying to make the performances as a cover band, not even with the originals yet, but just whenever we started playing. So a part of that came from that aspect of trying to segue. So all of a sudden, this segue, and even in the tours now, you'll still hear him. He's been doing it 30, 40 years. And some of the same segue to go to different songs. So I'm sure part of that with Long Time and Foreplay was a matter of trying to do some kind of segue. And then, wait a minute, Foreplay kind of, and then into Long Time. Whether or not he really had thought of it as that, it couldn't have been, because again, he only had that. In '69, that's all he had. He didn't play that and then go into a long time didn't exist yet. So, he basically utilized Foreplay just as a segue probably from something else, then into long time, and then it became what it is.
That is such a classic Boston sound. Acoustic guitar, then it turns into harmony guitars and Brad's amazing vocal. What do you remember about when you were starting to record that?
This is a long process. You don't sit down and play it and it's done. So it's years, between when I put the bed down to where he might finally have everything else finished.
When you get to that hand claps and then that first chorus, what I like about it is you have the first chorus, and then you have the face melter after the second chorus of the guitar. And then that Brad Delp scream. Just incredible. Were you in the studio when they were finishing the last?
No, my work is first, the drum beds. Tom was very, quiet. He did all his work by himself. When Brad came, it was just him and Brad. I didn't really take part in those. So I really couldn't tell you exactly. But I'd been in the studio with Brad at other times. Some of this, I just wasn't all the time. That specific song, I don't remember. But Brad, again, he's just a phenomenal genius. Everything that came out of his mouth was great.
It's a different song without those hand claps.
If anything, because the hand claps are a little out of time. They're not perfect. That song, greatness comes from flaws, not from perfection. So in the studio, actually we used some paint cans or coffee cans. It wasn't, it was kind of just like hey, let's try this. And it worked. So, it wasn't percussion instruments. It wasn't even musicians. I think it was some friends of Cindy, Tom's wife or something, but it was just, I think Cindy was in there. So it wasn't musicians. And that's it. That's part of the genius. It's Tom. That's part of the genius because it made it not perfect. I used to hate it a little bit because I'm listening to they're going, man, I can listen to them. We were a band. We were a working band. We were constantly developing. We were practicing all the time. New ideas were always coming up. So it was an ongoing process. The thing about Long Time is Brad's scat singing in the end. Brad's voice is one in its own. It's the greatest voice in rock and music, I think. It's just the quality from his lowest note to his highest, the fullness, the quality. It's just incredible.
What did you think the first time that you heard Brad sing?
There's no way to describe it. I mean, again, every vocal on that album is Brad, and he just spit them out. No one can do that. There's no one on the planet. I look at Brad, Steve Perry. They're the two cream as far as the quality. They're not showing about attitude and punk or all that. The beauty of their voices, you can't touch them. Standing on stage when Brad goes and hits that high note in More Than a Feeling. And he does it, he's already singing a note higher than any human. And then he goes higher. I've never seen anything like that anywhere.
Yeah, you're right. To me, Brad Delp and Steve Perry, I think that's the bar. The bar has been set for male singing.
From a standpoint of quality, not about entertaining.
How would you best describe the genius of Tom, his invention, and then just him as a player, as a producer and songwriter?
I can remember the first times we started playing, we jammed. After we rehearsed the cover band, we would jam. And I can still, to this day, see him sitting right there at his M, and he would be doing, because he had the M, he had the double keyboard. So he could get these nice, fast kind of runs on the keys, and we were interacting, and it was phenomenal. And then once he got going on guitar, and we'd be doing the double solos, and again, still, he was a strong player. Tom is an engineer. He is a genius, and he built this over years. And is the main one. So it's, and all that stuff, it's him.
Hey, thanks so much for watching. Leave us a comment about Boston and about their debut album. Is this a perfect album? I believe it is. Do they deserve to be in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame? I believe they do. What do you think about the tireless effort of Tom Scholz, about the genius of Brad Delp? Let's get into a great discussion about this incredible band. If you like this content, we do invite you to subscribe. And until next time, I'm telling you, 3 chords and the truth, my friends.